I never thought I'd be the person tracking her husband's location. But there I was, sitting in my parked car, staring at the little pulsing dot on my phone that showed Jake was at his mom's house, 20 minutes away from our home, where he was supposed to be watching our 6-month-old daughter. Let me back up. I just returned to work after maternity leave. It wasn't an easy decision, but Jake had promised we'd split childcare. He'd even suggested a trial day, alone with the baby, to prove he could handle it. I agreed, tentatively, because part of me wanted to believe he meant it. The other part, the part that had spent months learning the difference between her hungry cry and her tired cry, wasn't so sure. Still, I left that morning feeling hopeful, or maybe just desperate to feel like myself again for 8 hours. By noon, my gut was twisting. I'd been checking my phone obsessively, waiting for the inevitable "when are you coming home" text. It never came, so I left work early, telling myself I was being paranoid. But when I pulled into our driveway, his car was gone. Our neighbor, Mrs. Lowell, waved from her porch. "He left around 9:30, she said, squinting like she was trying to remember. Looked in a hurry. I called Jake. He picked up on the third ring, voice casual. "Hey, just running errands, everything's fine." And then I heard it, the sharp, hiccuping wail of our daughter in the background. My throat went dry. "Where are you really?" I asked. He paused a beat too long. "Home. I told you." That's when I opened the location app. We'd shared ours after a late-night news segment about safety, back when we still trusted each other. The dot didn't lie. 20 minutes later, I was standing on his mother's doorstep, fists clenched. She answered, my baby propped on her hip like a grocery bag. "Jake needed a break," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Men aren't built for this." He appeared behind her, shoulders hunched, no eye contact, just a mumbled, "Mom's better at it anyway." I took the baby, her onesie smelling like his mom's lavender detergent instead of the unscented kind we'd bought. That's when he admitted it. He'd been dropping her off here every day this week. His mom charged him $300, which he'd taken from our joint account without telling me. "It's not a big deal," he kept saying, like he was explaining a minor Amazon purchase. But it was. We'd had the same fight for months. Me pleading with him to bond with her, him insisting he would when she's more fun. I thought the trial day was a turning point. Turns out it was just his exit strategy. In the car, he doubled down. "You're too controlling. Mom's help doesn't hurt anyone." I tried to explain that hiring his mother wasn't the issue. Lying about it was, that I wanted him to know how to soothe her when she's teething, or what her tired cues are. He rolled his eyes. "She's fed. She's safe. What's the problem?" The problem was the text thread I found later that night, guilt burning my stomach as I scrolled. Him to his mom, "She's overreacting. Just keep helping me." His mom, "Don't worry. She'll give up soon." I closed his phone, my hands shaking. His mom called the next morning. "Jake's stressed," she said, like she was diagnosing a cold. "Stop nagging him or he'll resent you." I wanted to scream. Instead, I called my sister, who divorced her husband after he checked out of parenting. "Jake's doing the same playbook," she said quietly. "Avoidance, entitlement, outsourcing the hard stuff." I slept on the couch that night, the baby monitor glowing beside me. Jake didn't come out to check. Not that I expected him to. He'd never gotten up for night feedings either. The next morning, I texted my boss, pushed my return date by another week. Jake saw the message over my shoulder. "You don't trust me?" he asked, like it was a joke. I didn't answer. We both knew. Here's what I can't shake. When his mom handed me the baby, she nuzzled into my neck, her tiny fingers gripping my shirt. She smelled wrong. Not bad, just not like home. And I realized Jake hadn't just lied to me. He'd made sure she didn't even smell like ours anymore. I don't know what happens next. All I know is I can't unsee that little dot on my screen, pulsing steadily in the wrong place. Or the way Jake looked at his mom instead of me, like she'd handed him a lifeline, not a child. Maybe I should have seen it coming. His mom always joked that he'd need her help with domestic stuff. I laughed it off then. Now I'm sitting here, wondering how many other promises he'll outsource, and how long I'll keep pretending not to notice. So Reddit, that's where I am, staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m., listening to my daughter snuffle in her crib. I don't know if I'm angry, heartbroken, or just tired. Maybe all three. All I know is I can't do this alone, but I'm starting to think I already am. Now for the first update. A week ago, I posted about catching my husband, Jake, lying about watching our daughter. People told me to give him another chance, said maybe he was just nervous, that new dads need time. So I did. And now I'm sitting in a Dunkin' parking lot, shaking so hard my coffee's sloshing over the lid, wondering how the hell I got here. I'll start with the part that makes me feel like I'm losing my mind. The iPad. I hid it behind the bookshelf in our living room, angled toward the baby's playmat. Jake didn't notice. He never notices where I put things anymore. That morning, he'd sworn, hand on his mom's Bible, which felt like a weird choice, that he'd stay home with her for real this time. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But when I pulled up the nanny cam feed from work, my stomach dropped. By 9:45 a.m., his mom's SUV was in our driveway. I watched Jake hand her the baby like she was a bag of groceries he couldn't be bothered to carry. No kiss goodbye, no instructions, just a quick pat on the back before he grabbed his gym bag and left. I kept staring at the screen, half expecting him to come back. He didn't. I texted him, "Why is your mom here?" His reply was instant. "Mom's better at this. Stop spying." I didn't recognize the person typing those words. The Jake I married used to brag about how he'd be a hands-on dad, how he'd take paternity leave if his job allowed it. Now here he was, gaslighting me over a goddamn iPad. I told him his mom needed to leave or I'd come home. He fired back, "You're being psychotic." So I left work. Again, my boss is starting to side-eye me, but I didn't care. The whole drive, I white-knuckled the steering wheel, replaying the fight from last week, how his mom had said men aren't built for childcare, how Jake just stood there, mute, letting her speak for him. When I walked in, his mom was jiggling the baby on her hip, her expression pure venom. "Look what you caused," she hissed. The baby's onesie was crusted with dried vomit, her face splotchy from crying. She lunged for me the second she saw me, her little fists tangling in my hair like she was afraid I'd disappear. Jake stormed in from the garage, red-faced. "You're humiliating me," he shouted, like I'd caught him cheating instead of whatever this was. His mom shoved the diaper bag at me. "He's trying his best," she snapped. But here's the thing. He wasn't. Not even close. While she packed up, I checked the nursery. The diaper pail was overflowing. The bottle warmer was still in the box, untouched. There were no notes, no attempts to follow the schedule I'd taped to the fridge. It hit me then. He hadn't even tried. Not once. Later, I asked if he'd consider parenting classes. Maybe if we learned together, it'd feel less like me grading him. He laughed, a real bitter laugh. "Why? So you can micromanage me there too?" I stood in the doorway of what used to be our room, watching him scroll through Twitter like nothing had happened, and realized he doesn't see a problem. In his mind, outsourcing the baby to his mom is a genius hack, not a failure. I moved into the guest room that night. He didn't help me carry my things, just stood in the hall, arms crossed. "You're picking fights instead of appreciating my support," he said. My throat closed up. Support? I wanted to scream. But the baby was finally asleep, so I bit my tongue until it bled. The next morning, I logged into our joint account to pay the electric bill. That's when I saw it, a $500 transfer to his mom. 2 months of childcare fees dated back to before I even returned to work. I felt dizzy. We'd agreed, no big expenses without talking first. But there it was, in black and white. He'd been lying longer than I'd realized. I texted his mom, asking her to stop coming over. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji, then blocked me. An hour later, his dad called. "You're tearing this family apart," he said, calm as a pastor. "Be a better wife." I hung up. What do you even say to that? The worst part came at the pediatrician's office. The nurse asked how we were adjusting to me being back at work. I opened my mouth to say fine, but instead I burst into tears, ugly, heaving sobs. The nurse handed me tissues and said softly, "Do you have help at home?" I couldn't answer. How do you explain that the person who's supposed to help is the reason you're drowning? That night, I withdrew half our savings, opened a new account under my name only. Jake's mom charges $500 a month. Who knows how much he'd send her if I stayed? I sat in the bank parking lot, gripping the steering wheel, wondering when I became the kind of person who hides money from her husband. I keep replaying that moment when I took the baby from his mom, how she clung to me, her breath hitching like she'd been holding it for hours. Jake stood off to the side, jaw tight, like he was the one who'd been wronged. I wanted to shake him, to scream, "She's yours too." But what's the point? He'd just hand the fight to his mom, same as everything else. So here I am. It's 3 a.m., and I'm typing this from the guest room while Jake snores down the hall. The baby's asleep in her crib, her cheeks still salty from crying. I don't know what happens next. All I know is I can't keep living in this limbo, where my husband is a stranger, his mom's the third parent, and I'm the villain for wanting something as simple as honesty. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe this is how it goes for some people. You have a kid, and the person you love becomes a roommate with opinions. But I can't accept that. Not yet. So yeah. That's the update. I wish I had a happy twist or a clear next step, but all I've got is a separate bank account and a baby who smells like lavender detergent again. For now, that'll have to be enough. Now for the second update. 2 weeks ago, I posted about my husband Jake handing our daughter off to his mom every chance he got. I thought things couldn't get worse. Turns out, I was just being creative. It started with a knock on the door. Jake was at work, and I was home with the baby. My boss had finally put me on probation for all the days I'd missed. His mom stood there, arms crossed, like she owned the place. I didn't open the door, just shouted through the wood, "Not a good time." She leaned in closer, her shadow blotting out the peephole. Let me see my granddaughter, or I'll call CPS. Her voice was all syrup and razors. They'll want to know why you're keeping her from family. My hands shook so bad I almost dropped the baby. I bought security cameras that afternoon, the kind that linked to my phone and saved footage to the cloud. Jake called it paranoid, but paranoia is cheaper than a lawyer, or so I thought. That night, I heard him on the phone in the garage. I'd gone down to grab laundry detergent, and his voice bled through the cracked door. If she leaves, she'll take the baby. Just play along until she chills out. A pause, then quieter. Mom, I know, but she's not like you. She actually cares. I didn't sleep, just stared at the ceiling, the baby's monitor glowing beside me. The next day, I met with a lawyer during my lunch break. She had this tiny office above a nail salon, the smell of acetone burning my throat. I told her everything. The $500 transfers, the CPS threat, the way Jake's hand stayed glued to his phone whenever the baby cried. She scribbled notes, her pen tapping out a rhythm. His financial secrecy? The covert childcare? Judges hate that, she said. But you'll need proof. I tucked her business card into the inner pocket of my bag, buried it under tampons and old receipts. But Jake's always been weirdly observant about the wrong things. That night, he found it while rifling through my stuff for a charging cable. His face did this slow melt from confusion to rage. "You're stealing my kid over nothing?" he shouted, flecks of spit hitting my cheek. The baby woke up wailing. His mom arrived 10 minutes later, no doubt summoned by some panicked text. She marched in like she'd been cast as the mediator in a Lifetime movie. "No court will believe you over us," she said, all smugness. I hit record on my phone just in time to catch it. Jake stood behind her, shoulders slumped, suddenly a kid again. The kicker? His sister texted me later. "He's always been like this. Mom babies him. Get out." We'd never been close, her and me. She lives in Oregon, teaches forestry or something. But those 9 words knocked the air out of me. Validation's a hell of a drug. I packed a go bag that night, diapers, onesies, my passport, hid it in the trunk under the spare tire. Jake's mom must have sensed the shift because 2 days later, she reported me to HR, claimed I'd stolen office supplies. A lie so dumb it almost circled back to genius. HR cleared me after 5 minutes, but the damage was done. My manager pulled me aside. "Personal issues need to stay personal," he said, like I'd chosen this. The stress tanked my milk supply. One morning, I pumped for 20 minutes and got half an ounce. The bottle looked pathetic, this sad, translucent swirl. Jake chose that moment to stroll in. "See," he said, nodding at the bottle. "You can't even feed her. You need Mom's help." I wanted to chuck the pump at his head. Instead, I switched to formula that afternoon. The guilt tasted worse than the powdered mix. Then came the credit card statement. Jake had been hiding it under the mattress, which, real subtle. $1,200 on Uber Eats and microtransactions for some dragon-themed game he plays. Meanwhile, I'd been scouring coupons for diapers. I sat on the bedroom floor, receipts spread around me like confetti, and laughed. Not a happy laugh, the kind that edges into a scream. I finally said it out loud in the Walmart parking lot. "I'm done." The baby was in the back seat, gumming a teething ring. Jake laughed, full-on belly laugh, like I'd told a joke. "You'll crawl back," he said, still grinning. "You can't do this alone." That night, I called the landlord, asked how to get off the lease. His voice crackled through the speaker. "Gotta submit a notarized request, might take 30 days. I wrote the deadline on the calendar in red Sharpie, counted the squares. Here's the thing nobody tells you about leaving. It's not the big moments that break you. It's the trash. Taking the garbage out one last time, knowing the next bag won't be yours. Finding his empty protein shakes in the fridge and thinking, he'll forget to buy more. Staring at the stupid cactus he got me for our anniversary, still alive against all odds. I don't know what happens next. The lawyer says to document everything, stay calm, pretend normalcy. But normalcy left when Jake decided fatherhood was a group project led by his mom. So I take photos of receipts, save voicemails, kiss the baby's forehead and whisper, "We'll be okay," until I almost believe it. The other night, I found Jake asleep on the couch, his hand curled around his phone. For a second, he looked like the guy I married, the one who cried when I walked down the aisle, who learned to change a tire so I wouldn't get stranded. I almost woke him, almost said, "We can fix this." But then the baby whimpered, and he didn't stir. Not even a twitch. So I walked away. Maybe one day I'll miss him. Maybe one day the anger will fade into something softer, something I can hold without cutting myself. But today I've got a go bag in the trunk and a camera feed pinging my phone every time his mom drives by. Today's enough. Now for the final update. 3 weeks since my last update. 3 weeks since I packed that go bag and called the landlord. 3 weeks since I realized I'm done wasn't a feeling, it was a to-do list. Jake took the baby for a daddy day while I boxed up our apartment. His idea, not mine. He'd been weirdly insistent, like he needed to prove something. I said yes because the faster I packed, the faster I could leave. My friend texted me a screenshot an hour later, his mom's Facebook post. A photo of them at the park, my daughter's sun hat tilted sideways. Jake was in the background, blurred, scrolling on his phone. His mom's caption, "Making memories with my sweet girl." I stared at the timestamp, posted 9 minutes after he'd left the house. The lawyer's office smelled like coffee and toner ink. She slid the custody paperwork across the desk. "File now," she said, "before he does." I handed over the USB drive. Recordings of his mom threatening CPS, bank statements showing the $1,700 he'd funneled to her, screenshots of him admitting he'd lied. The lawyer's eyebrow twitched when she heard his mom's voice on the recording. "No court will believe you over us. They'll believe this," she said, tapping the USB. I confronted Jake that night, my phone open to the Facebook post. He paled, that guilty twitch in his jaw. "You're still lying," I said. "We're done." His panic was almost physical, the way his hands fluttered, the sweat blooming on his collar. "I'll change," he kept saying. "I'll do whatever you want." I didn't believe him, but I wanted to. God, I wanted to. So I agreed to one last chance. Stupid, maybe, but love makes you stupid. We drafted a parenting plan. 4 therapy sessions, couples and solo, a licensed sitter if he needed help. No unapproved babysitters, meaning his mom. He signed it without reading, his pen digging into the paper. I almost felt bad. Almost. His mom arrived an hour later. She didn't knock, just walked in like she still had a key. Maybe she did. Jake froze, the plan crumpled in his fist. She snatched it, ripped it clean down the middle. "You're emasculating him," she spat. I'll never forget how Jake looked then, small, hunched, like a kid waiting for detention. I picked up the phone. "Leave," I said, "or I'm calling the cops." She laughed, actually laughed, until the dispatcher answered. The custody hearing was a blur of fluorescent lights and too many forms. Jake's mom testified first, all honeyed concern. "She's unstable," she told the judge. "She's keeping my son from his child." The judge, a woman with silver hair and a resting frown, asked to hear the recordings. When my lawyer played his mom's "no court will believe you" line, the room got very quiet. Jake's mom was dismissed mid-sentence. Jake got supervised visits. 2 hours a week at a center with crayons and squeaky toys. He also had to repay the $1,700. His mom's babysitting fees, the judge called it. I didn't cheer, just hugged the baby tighter, her head warm against my neck. Moving day was all rain and cardboard. My sister drove 6 hours to help, her minivan stuffed with granola bars and patience. The new apartment's half the size, but the locks are good. The first night, I slept with the baby in a nest of blankets on the floor. She kept rolling into my ribs. It was perfect. Last week, I ran into Jake's coworker at the gas station. He looked embarrassed, shuffling by the snack aisle. "Jake got demoted," he said, like I'd asked. "Too many family emergencies." I didn't tell him those emergencies were his mom's dry cleaning and Starbucks runs. Just nodded, paid for my gas, and left. Then 2 days ago, Jake showed up, sober for once. His shirt was ironed, his hair combed. "I want to try therapy," he said. For real this time. The baby grabbed at my sleeve, babbling. I thought about the cactus he'd bought me, how it thrived on neglect, how I'd left it on the old windowsill. I said no, but I didn't slam the door. Maybe that makes me weak. Maybe it makes me human. All I know is this. Every morning, the baby wakes me with sticky fingers and a drooly grin. Every night, I check the locks twice, and somewhere in between, I forget to miss him. The lawyer says the custody order's final. Jake's mom tried to appeal, but the judge shut it down. My sister thinks I should move again, just in case. Maybe I will. For now, the cameras stay up. The go bag stays in the trunk. I don't know if Jake will ever change. Don't know if I'll ever stop flinching at doorbells, but I finally know this. I can do alone what he couldn't do with his mom, his lies, his half-assed promises. She's fed, she's safe, and she's mine.